The Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey everyone, we are the Unconventional Therapists, and this is your guide to nothing, where each and every week we take a topic, theme, or thing, analyze it, and make it all make sense in the scheme of life, living, and mental health. My name is Dave. I am joined here with my co-host, Greg. All hail, Greg.
Oh, wow. You're going to go right after that like that? Jeez.
Is that an edit? I don't know.
That's a lot for this one. Okay. All right. Well,
there's
Dave,
a reason I said that, everyone.
This is a
bear with us.
A doozy of a topic.
Greg, do me a favor. Do your overview, but then I have to tell our audience something awesome that recently happened.
Okay.
Tell them the topic, and then let's do that, and then we can do our overview.
Okay. So I'm going to do half an overview, the topic, and then finish the overview. Because it's important to know why we're talking about this, I realize.
And why I said that intro.
Yes. So when the fear gets to be so big and it seems like we have no control, we have to make a tangible enemy that we can overcome to regain control. We need an adversary. And Dave, there is an old Hebrew word for adversary. And do you know what that word is? It's Satan.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the Satanic Panic, and from the early 80s. And I mean, obviously the origins go back much further, but for our purposes, from the early 80s to the mid 90s, it was believed that there were satanic cults everywhere performing rituals that require the blood of your children and so on and so forth. Dave, like, what do you got to say about that? The Satanic Panic.
I think that's amazing.
It's crazy.
And speaking of blood of your children, I have to tell the audience about something awesome I saw.
Oh.
So I was sitting at home the other night and I get a text from a friend. And I look at this text from said friend, and he tells me that he caught his children making a video on his phone. And guess what? That friend was Greg, and it was his children making a video on their phone, on Greg's phone, of them as Greg and I.
No, Dave, but this most disappointing part of the whole thing was they were both pretending to be Dave. They kept both saying, like, hey, this is Dave, and I'm here with my fellow Greg.
Greg.
But they were both being Dave. And I'm like, no one wants to be. They flipped a coin and they just said, let's just both be Dave.
Oh, that made my freaking night. I watched that probably 15 times. Hey, this is Dave, and I'm here with my fellow Greg.
I'm not going to post it because we don't need any competition. It's tough out there.
We need to post that. That was adorable, and it made my night. But truly our biggest fan.
Truly. So what do you think, Dave? Want to jump into the origins here?
Yeah, let's do this. And just so everyone knows, this is not going to be scary, but there will be some graphic details for sure, because unfortunately there have been some crimes due to Satanic Panic.
It is scary, Dave. I don't know why you think that this is scary. It's about as scary as it gets.
What? I find nothing scary about this, but all right.
It's all scary. I haven't liked 1 minute of researching this. This has been
I've loved every minute of it.
Okay. So, all right. So I mentioned this, we're going to take this from the early 80s, but what I meant was 1480s. I'm half kidding, but we have to take it way back to the very beginning. And this isn't even the very beginning. This is just as far back as we feel appropriate going. And there was something called blood libel. And this was obviously false accusations that Jewish people were murdering Christian boys for the use of their blood in religious rituals. So this whole anti-Semitism thing it's not new at all. This has been going on for centuries. And this was similar to any witch hunt. It allowed them to be seen, the Jewish people to be seen as an other. And the Christians could take what they want. Christians were threatened by the growth of and the longevity of the Jewish religion and race, and they felt threatened. And what's ironic is the Romans had done this exact thing to the Christians.
Yeah.
Just years prior before this. So it's when the Romans felt threatened and the Christians were overcoming in popularity and becoming this force, they created a witch hunt for them too. This is something that happens throughout history over and over and over again.
Yeah. It sounds pretty messed up.
It's messed up. It's messed up because you're so separate from it when you're saying like 1480s or even the witch hunts in Salem. But people were killed for this.
I was thinking the same thing because as you were describing the blood libel, you were like, you sounded really like, oh. And I'm like, wow, Greg, you're really flustered about this thing that happened in 1480, huh?
That's right.
But yeah, no, you're right. When you think about the reality of the situation, I mean, these are humans and these are things that could potentially happen in our day and time. They would just look a little different, right?
It's murder based on fear and nothingness. It's just made up stories.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That was pretty deep.
Yeah, well, I have my moments.
So we're going to flash forward a little bit. So we were in 1480. Now we're going to go all the way to the 60s. And in the 60s, a new church really was starting to develop. And Greg, that was the Church of Satan.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. The best reaction you could have to the Church of Satan.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And Anton LaVey, that's a pretty big name for the Church of Satan. This was like in 1966, and he declared this as why do I always decide to actually try to pronounce words that I don't know how to pronounce? Annos Satanas, which means the first year of the age of Satan.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
These are just people making shit up, having a good time. I mean, that's what it's true.
This is an important time, Greg, because a lot's going on in the 60s.
Sure.
You know, so we have the civil rights movement happening. We have hippies.
Yep.
And just social unrest, people rejecting ideas, shift in society's morals, all that stuff. So it's society moving away from these traditional and religious conservative values, right?
Right.
So what happens when society starts to move away from those things? People get scared.
Yeah.
It shakes society, right? So there's a group of people that are saying we're not going to take this anymore, or we see things different. And the people that hold on to those values are now scared.
It's terrifying. I mean, and you know, you bring up an interesting thing with Anton LaVey, and a lot of people say that the Satanic Panic, as we know it, starting in the 80s, started with a book, and Anton LaVey was actually sued the author of this book for defamation or whatever it was, because the author of this book was accusing him of a lot of things. So the name of the book was Michelle Remembers, and this was it contributed to the rise of the Satanic Panic in that it was written by someone very credible. It was written by a psychiatrist, Lawrence Pazder, and he used something that still sort of is used today, and it's called recovered memory therapy.
Yeah,
and he used this to uncover ritual abuse, and the claims were written as fact in the book.
Yeah,
but it also this book like relied on the power of suggestion and priming and confirmation bias, something that I think we need to spend some time on in this episode, because a lot of this stuff is born in those psychological phenomena. Yeah. But
now, Greg, do you know the details of what Michelle remembered?
No, I mean, I know some of it. I know some of what happened. What did she remember?
Oh, well, it's like satanic ritual stuff. You know, it's things that as you hear, you're like, that's absurd.
Yeah, like drinking baby's blood and like sharks, things like that. Like what was it? Injecting each other with battery acid comes up over and over again. There's all kinds of weird, dark, almost urban legend like rumors that come around this stuff.
What was the name of the author of this book? The therapist?
Lawrence Pazder, I think.
Okay. Do you know a little something about Lawrence, our old buddy Larry?
No. Is that Larry? Okay, I can see that. Yeah,
Laurie. So he's a psychiatrist, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder when the code of ethics for psychiatrists began, because this gentleman divorces his wife and runs away with his patient, who this book is about.
Well, I think that's the least of his problems when it comes to the ethics, even though
Greg, just go with me on this one.
Okay. All right.
No, honestly, that was the first thing that stood out, because like that is drilled into you when you go into, your schooling for this profession. You are warned about relationship dynamics that can happen with patients, and that it is a big no-no to carry on this kind of relationship. He divorces his wife, he disappears with his patient, and ultimately gets married. But he did pass away in 2004, so we can't even put him on blast on the show and like call him in here to question him or anything like that.
Yeah, because he would answer us, and we'd have. It's interesting that you say that though, because the people accused of this, all these satanic crimes that they didn't commit, there was no protection for them. So on this side of the fence, there's no protections for that. But on the religious side of it, on the Christianity side of it, if you hurt someone trying to solve these problems, like through exorcism or through any other kind of ritual, I would say sort of like an opposite type ritual, and you hurt them, you're protected against that, because it's thought that your, the morality or the intention of what you're doing is good. Yeah. Versus, so it's interesting. So the people who are accused are just accused, and that's that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Greg, I know you probably were interested in this too. The book Michelle Remembers is going for a pretty penny on eBay right now.
I knew that you would be after that thing as soon as I read about it.
And I saw the book cover. There's a cool book cover with like Satan on the cover, and I was like, "That's mine. I need that." I literally think I get something that has to do with almost every episode.
Yeah, no, I think it's cool. It's just that these memories are planted in, and that's the problem. So this whole thing is just like, it's like Salem 2. It's like a fear-based hysteria. It's a way to explain what can't be explained. It vilifies a changing world, like you're talking about, like when things are changing. It's behavior that threatens the way things are, control through fear. And the stakes are really high with this, though. It's bigger than disease. Like you see controlling behavior through fear of disease. Like we see that constantly right now. We see it with war, and both work well through obviously controlling behavior. But this was something else. This is a fight for your soul, essentially. So it felt big.
Greg, there is genuine fear on the people in power's hands, right? Like they genuinely are afraid that something is disrupting society. From my understanding of this, at least, it's less about their control, and it's more about them feeling like they're being infiltrated by something they don't understand. And like we've always talked about 1,000 times in this podcast, when we don't understand, our mind can go to some crazy places.
Yeah, we have to make something up so that we could fight that. And then, so it all makes sense, even though it makes way less sense.
Was it last week? No, it must have been the week prior, the Changelings episode. You said something about like, oh, it'll be funny in like years in the future for us to look back and say like, oh, remember when we used to think this? How crazy is that? Like, it will also be interesting to know in future years when we look back at this time, like what things did we think? Well, actually, I can probably already answer that question. What things were we afraid of that we were like, well, that's stupid that we were ever afraid of that. That makes literally no sense.
That's happening like right now.
It's literally happening right now as I was saying that.
Yeah. With like across, like me and you across from each other. Like I can't sit here and say like I don't believe in any of this at all. In full honesty, I mean, I have so much Catholic guilt, and so much of it is how I was brought up that I can't, in full certainty, say that this is impossible or this is. I just can't. I would be lying to myself. There's no way I could do it.
Catholic guilt is probably a future episode.
Oh, it's gotta be. It's everywhere. Yeah, it's there. Yeah. So I think another part of this though, Dave, is people, this is kind of what we're talking about here. Like people were waking up to the idea that children are being abused, and it's making, you know what I mean? It's making it.
Thank you for bringing that back up. I completely forgot to mention that piece.
But here's the thing about it, right? I think that we needed something to explain it. We just can't accept that as human beings we're this bad. It has to be something supernatural that causes people to harm their children. Like, how can we live with that?
Yeah, it's like to influence us or to sway us into doing more negative things. And you're right, Greg, because previously with abuse, reporters didn't exist, and people, doctors and physicians and professionals would just turn their eye, like,
Mhm.
pretend they didn't see anything, or they could easily make up an excuse. And then it came into reality of like how prevalent and like the types of things that were happening in homes. And yeah, they could no longer just turn the other way. I'm forgetting the year that the mandated reporter got put into place.
It's got to be all around this time.
It was in the 70s or the early 80s, or maybe
Probably
even
the
later.
80s. It's just so much.
It was in the 70s, though, the late 70s, I believe, that the idea of child abuse really did start to become more prevalent, if I remember correctly.
And it's so much easier to say, hey, look, it's this thing, it's this entity, it's Satan, it's this. It's so much easier to say it's that than it is to look at this dark side of human nature and address that. It's so much easier to just avoid that. And I think that we got to come back to that. But here's the thing. So in the 80s too, another thing that's happening is women are going back to work. They're getting into the workforce. So people, aside from the parents, have to start watching the kids. And that's when we start getting into these daycares.
So we're going to get into an example here of something that happened during Satanic Panic. Actually, one of the bigger events of the Satanic Panic, and kind of like the onset for a lot of other issues. And this was called the McMartin preschool trial. And this was in 1983. A woman named Judy Johnson, who was a mother of a preschool student, reports to the police that her son was sodomized by her estranged husband, who was a McMartin teacher, and his name is Ray Bucky. After that, her child states that he had painful bowel movements.
Oh boy!
Now
it could be anything.
It could be anything, correct? Yeah. And another interesting thing that I heard when I was looking this up is that actually the mom dropped off her kid at this daycare, and like the kid wasn't even enrolled, but they ended up just like allowing him to go there eventually. Like, oh, this woman's, I don't know what their rationale was. I didn't hear that part, but it's like the mom also was just dropping her kid off at a place that he didn't belong. So she's there's more to her. We're going to get to that in a little bit. Johnson, aside from the statement against Ray Bucky that she makes several more accusations about people at the daycare having sexual encounters with animals and other wild abuse accusations that are just really out there. Bucky was questioned but not prosecuted because there was no evidence. But the police, this is what really takes this like on a roller coaster here. The police send a letter to about 200 of the parents stating that their child might have been abused.
Yes.
And to question their children. I'm just going to read this really quick. It's part of what was on that letter. So records indicate that your child has been or is currently a student at the preschool. We're asking for your assistance in this ongoing investigation. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Our investigation indicates that possible criminal acts include oral sex, fondling of genitals, buttock or chest area, and sodomy, possibly committed under the pretense of taking the child's temperature. Also, photos may have been taken of children without their clothing. Any information from your child regarding having ever observed Ray Bucky to leave a classroom alone with a child during any nap period, or if they have ever observed Ray Bucky tie up a child, is important. Now, imagine you're a parent and you get this letter. Greg, if I sent this letter to you, right, and I was for one of your children's schools, what would your instant reaction be?
Well, everyone would be happy because they don't have to go to school tomorrow. That'd be one thing, right?
Because you wouldn't let your kids go back.
No, they would never go back. And the thing is, this is a couple of things happening here. This is the boy who cried wolf scenario, where it's like when this kind of stuff really does happen, people aren't going to be believing it as easily. And the doctors were falling prey to confirmation bias because people would bring their children to the doctors, and the doctors would be looking for, trauma in vaginal areas or wherever else. But if they're looking for something, they can find something.
Oh yeah, you're going to find something.
Yeah.
But as a parent, Greg, you're going to panic, I would assume.
Oh yeah.
And they're asking you to question your child. Now suddenly this panicked parent is coming at their child, and like this isn't like, I feel like almost if this happened today, the parent would handle it way better than I could imagine a parent in 1983 handling this. When child abuse, like we were talking about, it wasn't as widely spoken and prevalent. I mean, it's prevalent, was probably more closeted.
Yeah.
So imagine getting this. I can't even imagine a parent questioning their child about this. And what do you even say? And does the child just start to agree with you because they're scared?
Of course they do. Like, did you drink blood today at school? Or
yeah.
Did you see any
good.
sharks? Do you know that one of the kids said that they had a parrot, like his response was they had a parrot pecking his penis.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean,
and then the parent was like, I said when you were at school, not when you're in your bedroom.
Yeah, parrot pecking the penis.
Kidding.
That's like a tongue twister.
So
that's problematic.
So the mom, Johnson, she was diagnosed and hospitalized for acute paranoid schizophrenia. And in 1986, she was actually found dead in her home from complications of chronic alcoholism before the preliminary hearing concluded. So this is the woman that kind of incited all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what was going on for her. But yet that information didn't even all come out to in the trial until later. So, a lot of this was already kind of in motion without people being aware of like where that actual first information came from.
And these people who ran the daycare, they went to prison, right, Dave?
So they were all questioned. So there was no actual like results from anything, no convictions.
Okay.
The McMartin preschool though was closed and the building was dismantled.
I was going to say the preschool's probably not doing so hot.
Yeah, no, that was done. And then several hundred children were interviewed by an agency called the Children's Institute International. Which is in LA. It's like an abuse therapy clinic, which their interviewing techniques were all considered to be suggestive and basically like feeding the children's narrative or almost building their own narrative and kind of just getting the kids to go along with it. And the most bizarre statements started to come out during this time, like accusations of seeing witches fly, traveling in hot air balloons, being taken through underground tunnels. The photographs that was mentioned, there was a game that the kids would play about a naked actor. So it was like, what you say is what you are. You're a naked movie star. That's what it was. So one of the kids mentioned naked movie star because they said they were questioned, like, do you ever see someone naked? And they said naked movie star. And then they took that as being photographed naked, even though it was just this little rhyme.
A little game. Yeah.
Yeah. Another really kind of funny part of this whole crazy debacle is one of the kids was shown a series of photographs by the McMartin's lawyer. And one of the photographs was of Chuck Norris. Mm-hmm. And the kid, this kind of shows you the power of suggestion. The kid identified him as being one of the abusers.
Yeah. Wow.
Which Greg's like, I always knew that about Chuck Norris.
No, it's actually the opposite. That would never be Chuck Norris. I'm a Walker, Texas Ranger. I'm a huge fan.
There was claims of orgies at car washes and airports, children being flushed. This is the best. Children being flushed down toilets to secret abuse rooms and then cleaned up so they could be presented back to their parents.
Did you get flushed down the toilet today? You know what I mean? It's like, it's always this kind of thing, as silly and wild as it sounds, we still talk about stuff like this today.
Yeah.
This kind of stuff still comes up. I mean, and with the QAnon and everything like that, we won't get into it, but this starting in the 1400s, starting well before the 1400s, these outlandish reports of abuse on children, it's just perpetuated over and over and over again.
Yeah.
It's
so like I said, there was no convictions. In 2005, though, there was an interesting retraction from a child. And there was a quote saying, "Never did anyone do anything to me. And I never saw them do anything. I said a lot of things that didn't happen. I lied. Anytime I would give them an answer that they didn't like, they would ask me again and encourage me to give them the answer they were looking for."
This is
felt
Salem.
Uncomfortable and a little ashamed that I was being dishonest. But at the same time, being the type of person I was, whatever my parents wanted me to do, I would do.
Plus, they were in deep. You couldn't all of a sudden be like,
this is the Salem witch trial, right?
Exactly.
They're just going with it at that point, because how do you turn around and say everything I just said was a lie?
Yeah,
just kidding.
There's no parrots. They don't even have a parrot.
Sorry, Chuck Norris.
Ah, man. Sorry, Chuck Norris. I know he came out unharmed though. I mean,
luckily,
impeccable reputation. So should I move on from this? I mean,
So we have a bunch of other examples. So, Greg, when we were researching Satanic Panic, I texted you and I was like, I thought Satanic Panic was one thing, and I didn't realize it was a ton of things.
It's so many things.
So
another
Greg,
one.
Give another example.
All right, so we got to keep it local. The Fall River cult murders. I had never heard of this. This was a case where 3 young women, troubled women, I guess you could say, they were involved in prostitution. They were ritualistically and brutally murdered by the leader of a small satanic cult. The guy's name is Carl Drew, and he went by the name of Satan, which is a different route than you see in other cults. But it's how different is that than Koresh using Messiah? He's just going the complete opposite direction.
It just sounds a little different. Satan.
It's not.
It's not
you
Messiah.
Don't get less followers for sure. It's less attractive. But there was, this is right down the street in Fall River. This is all about those things that we're talking about when you think of Satanic Panic. There's claims of chanting in the forest, altars, human sacrifice. Again, with the battery acid into veins, symbols are a huge part of this. Symbols drawn on the bodies of the victim. Yep. This seems very like life imitating art. Like this is all happening based on symbolism and things that we've seen throughout history. But so there was 3 young women, and they were bludgeoned at 3 different times, almost ritualistically with rocks. They were tied and bound with fishing line. You can imagine how bad that was. The first victim was found, and you want to talk about graphic, I'm sorry to even have to say this, but found with a baseball bat inside of her, and they were all sacrificed in these horrific ways. The heads were removed. It just like this really dark story of a man who's taking out his dark fantasies and desires and using the guise of a religious leader to get other people involved.
Yeah.
It's just, and these poor girls were runaways. There was drugs obviously involved. He was a pimp, and they worked for him. And one of his, pimps in training, who was another prostitute, was in a relationship with the last woman who was murdered, and she took part in it. It's just, and I could get into these murders if you want to learn more about them. It is very graphic, some of the things that were happening that, I don't even feel like we need to talk about here, but it's just all that stuff. And we mentioned symbols. Dave, this was a huge part of it for me. Like everything in the late 80s, early 90s was a sign of the devil. There's devil worshippers in the woods. There's a lot of imagery around this. Like I even remember, do you remember this thing where it was Procter and Gamble, like toothpaste company, like all these just around the house products people would be like, oh, don't use that crest because it's they worship the devil, or there's signs of the devil on the toothpaste. I'm not kidding. Do you remember this? Any of this?
No, not really. But I just remember people drawing pentagrams everywhere and stuff like that.
Pentagrams, Led Zeppelin album cover. It would be like, oh, see how this guy's wearing a hood and there's a bird on his shoulder? That's the devil.
What album was it that if you listened to it backwards, it was a satanic ritual?
I don't know.
Was it a Led Zeppelin album or was it Black Sabbath? I can't remember. I think it was Black Sabbath.
Are you thinking of the movie The Gate?
No, but that's a great movie. Good reference, Greg.
I know. You should be proud of me because, yeah. That's Satanic Panic too, isn't it? That's going to be like a late 80s movie, and then they open a gate to hell. So, yes. This stuff is everywhere. Dave, any more examples?
I have a couple more. So obviously one of the big ones, and this is what was on our mind when we were thinking of this topic, the West Memphis 3. So
huge stuff.
1993 murder. The 3 boys from West Memphis, Arkansas, Damian Eccles, Jesse Miskelly, and Jason Baldwin. They were sentenced to life in prison for the murder of some juveniles that they felt was part of a satanic ritual. Mm-hmm. And they were obviously exonerated later. And there's a whole HBO documentary that's absolutely amazing to watch about them. But that was a big one. And we can kind of gloss over that because I think that's probably that is enough for probably us to do an episode.
1,000%. And the documentary itself, Paradise Lost, I think was the name of it.
Yeah.
That was the catalyst in ending the Satanic Panic, shining light on. All right, look, we have our blinders on, we see these guys, these kids in Metallica shirts, and we assume that they're evil, and we assume that they committed this murder, and there was a big confirmation bias. We only saw what we wanted to see, and these kids went to jail for something they didn't do just because they were wearing a band's t-shirt.
Yeah, and like Damien Eccles became like this vilified person because he was a little off. You know, I think he was he Wiccan? Is that the religion he was? And he was like, and then he was actually on the stand talking about how it's about nature. It's not about Satan.
No.
You know, like the religious piece was so lost on everyone, and like shame on people for just assuming they know what a thing is about without actually looking into it. Like, way to like crucify someone because of something you never actually investigated.
Yeah, but like, I think it was like rural Arkansas at that time. To be wearing a Metallica t-shirt and be, you know, following that religion was kind of it was a Wiccan bad idea.
Oh, I like that one. Good one, Greg.
Thanks.
So I actually have one that's going to kind of like go feed into this panic, and I think that's why this is also important to share. So in 1984, there was a 17-year-old drug dealer and self-proclaimed Satanist, Ricky Queso. I think that's how you say his name. It's
Ricky Cheese?
SSO. Ricky Cheese.
You know they call him Cheese.
Oh my God. No, not queso, like nacho cheese queso.
Oh, okay.
Well, he ends up murdering his friend Gary Lawers in the woods in Newport, New York, while he's high on mescaline. He stabs Gary 36 times and sliced out his eyes, which led to the media saying this was some sort of satanic ritual. He had friends there. There were friends of Queso and Lawers that were present, and they told the police that as he was getting ready to murder him, he commanded him to say you love Satan, and then murdered him. The weeks following, Queso had taken teens into the woods to show them the dead body and brag. And I feel like I've seen 1,000 movies that were probably based on this story.
Yeah. Stand By Me.
Yeah, sure. He also told some that he killed Lars because Satan told him to, and he believed that the devil had manifested himself into a black crow. And as he asked Satan if he should take his life, the crow pawed, and that was his sign, that like confirmation, like, let's do this. So the media, you know, they really played a big part of this, saying he was part of a satanic cult. And, you know, it was called a cult called the Knight of the Black Circle was the supposed name. There was no evidence to any of this. His dad also said that he was like, you know, researching stuff about witchcraft and wearing apparel that features satanic symbols. The day he was arrested, though, he was wearing an AC/DC shirt. So think about this. We have all this Satan information about him. Everybody's like kind of saying this is, you know, he's connected with Satan. He wears Satan stuff. And then he comes out wearing an AC/DC shirt. What do you think that did for the connection between heavy metal and Satan?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think anytime you see this, like this behavior that's outside of recognizable human, you know, behavior, we got to call it something else. It's just not, they have to point to something else.
Yeah. So they see the shirt AC/DC and they make that connection of heavy metal and satanic rituals. And that just, you know, fuels the fire for the media, the religious figures, parents, everybody else. And this gentleman ended up killing himself in prison under 48 hours after being arrested.
I mean, the guy was looking for an identity.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I mean, he, you know, definitely some mental health stuff going there without a doubt. He's hearing, you know, crows cawing, and he thinks.
So what's unfair for the crow is how does he know how does he take the caw as a yes? The caw could have been a no caw.
Yeah.
I mean, what is
totally.
he? A lot of birds in this. A lot of birds.
Another like prominent figure that came up during the Satanic Panic, Richard Ramirez. We saw obviously the court feeds, and he's drawing pentagrams on his hands and showing it off, and, you know, hail Satan as he's leaving the courtroom, you know, really playing big into this. But interesting thought about that is, like, I saw an interview with him, and he's really toying with that idea of we all have evil inside of us. Because they're asking him, are you pure evil? He goes, I think we all have evil in us.
Yeah, the shadow, young. We talked about that. Krampus.
But here's the thing with him too. Like, he's kind of full of shit too, Richard Ramirez. Like,
of course.
He totally ripped off a lot of his when he would be interviewed, it totally seemed rehearsed. It seemed like everything he said was like scripted almost. Eileen Wuornos said the same thing about us all having duality and there being an evil in all of us. She said the same exact line. She just said it differently. And it's almost like he kind of just tweaked that and made it his own.
Well, of course, we all have duality. Well, of course, we all have evil in us. What makes us good is acknowledging that evil and acting on the way that we feel we should act instead of what our desires or our compulsions lead us to act. But the thing with him is, it's like, you got to imagine Richard Ramirez. He probably didn't have the best upbringing. That's an episode we get into. But what he's doing is acting a certain way and receiving. I mean, it's sensational, right? He's receiving attention and people are paying attention to him for maybe the first time in his life. And he's thinking to himself, how is this happening? How am I getting this attention? And he's got to lean into it.
Yeah. He literally did terrible things to women, and then women were flocking to celebrate him in court. It's if you think about that dynamic, it's pretty sick.
You can't explain the people who Dahmer had the same sort of following. I mean, according to the show, he was very attractive. But if you look at Dahmer in real life, that was an ugly dude. I mean, the 80s or not. Anyways, we are getting into sort of pop culture stuff. So let's lean into it. Well, what do we know about? Let's talk about the music, Dave. Like you mentioned AC/DC, Judas Priest, right? Marilyn Manson, Nine Inch Nails. These are the ones I remember.
Black Sabbath, Ozzy, obviously. Yeah, just like this connection between metal and Satan really came big. Slayer was another one.
But they leaned into it. These bands leaned into it too. With all the imagery in their albums.
Right.
Yeah.
Some
like
were
Black Sabbath.
Yeah. But Ozzy, so that was a funny thing, because I shared with you this week the Geraldo video where he's the devil worship, exposing Satan's underground, is the title of the special that aired. And he pulls in Ozzy, and Ozzy's not going to take responsibility for all this crazy stuff, right?
No, he shouldn't. I mean, he's a performer. It's a show. It's theater.
Yeah.
He's British.
Did you see in the beginning of that special, metal artist called King Diamond?
Yes. Yeah.
And he's passed away a few years ago. Well, it's probably been more than a few years ago. But he is a Satanist, but was also kind of like, that's not the message though that we're sending. Like that's not connected. So interesting, even that aspect of it is someone who could follow the Church of Satan still saying, like, I'm not telling people to go kill people. That's not what my music's about. But obviously people were afraid. They're making connections that they want, and they're building stories. There was a 14-year-old named Thomas Sullivan who stabbed his mother to death, and he was a fan of Black Sabbath. So that became the narrative. Black Sabbath, influenced this 14-year-old to kill his mom, because we can't understand that, like why a 14-year-old would kill their mom.
Right.
So we have to find a connection and a narrative for it.
That's what we're talking about. Like, you have to make something tangible. You have to be able to point to something. We can't just live in a world where that kind of thing could happen and there'd be no explanation. The movies were great though. I mean, I love Rosemary's Baby. I love that book, and I love that book especially. The movie's kind of okay. The
movie is kind of okay.
Dude, the book.
That's a classic.
Listen, I'm not one of those people that are like, oh, the book. But in that case, yes. Because normally I'll take the movie all day. It's just much easier. But the Omen movie, great.
Yeah.
We did mention The Exorcist. Come on.
Yeah.
That movie was way too scary. I saw that way too young. It was way too scary. I'm still scared of that movie. But a movie that's sort of lighthearted and touches on these themes. Have you ever seen The Burbs?
Yeah.
Great movie for this. And, I don't know if you ever stayed home from school in the early 90s and your mother would be watching Days of Our Lives. Have you ever seen that show?
No.
There was a huge satanic panic situation there. Like one of the people was possessed or something. That went on for months. And all the talk shows, like you talked about Geraldo, but anytime you stayed home from school and it was 1:00 in the afternoon, you see someone talking about Satanic Panic on Donahue, Sally Jesse Raphael, any of these shows, it was just on.
I missed that time.
Oh, what a time! What a time. All right, Dave. I guess we could quickly go over what's important here, the psychological, and we've talked about a few of them, but do you? Well,
yeah. The recovered memory therapy is interesting because, believe it or not, I'm approached with this often, where somebody comes in and they don't have memories of periods of their time, and there's this thought that this is, repressed memories, and a lot of times people want those memories, so they're like. And there's there's a general assumption in society that if you have repressed memories, and I'm assuming it's stemming from this exact time where we were talking about with Michelle remembers or whatever it is, where we assume that their repressed memory is us blocking out something really bad that happened in our life. And I'm not going to lie, I've been under that assumption as well.
Well, they are designed to bring up those forgotten memories of childhood, sexual abuse or physical abuse or emotional abuse. That we can regress. We've seen this with the dissociative identity disorder and dissociation period. When you're a kid, you can't fight or flight, so you flee into your own mind. But what's the problem is, so of course it's possible to have repressed memories, and recovering them is possible, but it's also possible and easy to implant memories that are false. That's where the danger lies. You don't want to, and then, so say you implant a false memory in someone's head, then they can kind of build on that and build a false narrative of things that never actually happen. That's what your brain's designed to do, to make sense of things. And, it's protecting you for a reason. I don't know. It's a tough one. It's
delicate work. I actually am actively been working on this with someone for quite a while. And the approach that we've taken, because we don't want to build a false narrative, is let's just kind of keep track. Let's pay attention as they come out, but let's not force it. If you seem to remember something, or you get sometimes it will maybe not come up as a memory, but it's almost like a feeling.
Yeah. Oh, 1,000%.
Evoke something. And then we'll take note of that and be like, all right, did you notice anything else? Or but it's it's so important and so hard at the same time to not just start building a narrative based on that one thing that you just brought up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Plus you got to remember too, your brain's a funny thing. It doesn't always have it's a funny thing in that sometimes it shows you what it thinks you need to see to protect you, not what actually happened. That's just what brains do sometimes.
I would say for people who have gaps in memory, if you really do struggle with getting that memory back, and it feels like it's really maybe it's hopeless, or it feels like it's been just so challenging and you've done so much, remember one thing: no matter what you remember, your current situation doesn't change. Yes, evoking a memory of something bad that you kind of had pushed away and you blocked out, it will obviously could give you new information, and maybe that might change the way you view a few things, but who you are is not going to change.
Yeah, it might help you to inform why you do the things you do, why some of the maladaptive behaviors you have now were potentially useful in the past.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really change where you're going or where you want to go, right?
It might view the way you see someone else if you end up uncovering something about a relationship you had, or but it again, and I know it sounds like I'm almost starting to contradict myself. It literally does not change the person you have become to this point, though. And you will still be able to go forward as that person. You will just have to make adjustments if you were to ever figure anything out. But at this point in time, it's the most important thing is the present, as always.
And I think the future.
In the future.
Okay. So, and sometimes the past. No, okay. Just kidding. All right. So listen, confirmation bias. That's another obviously we've mentioned this a few times, so I figured it'd be nice if we kind of talk about exactly what it is. And this is the idea where people search for the information that confirms their own beliefs. So how many times do you see this in this? So whatever's confirming their own beliefs and their values. And once you've kind of affirmed that, and once you kind of decide, oh, this is the devil, or this, that truth, that's hard to back that down. That's just going to be the way it is. It's like, think about, I remember two things come to my mind: the Lacey Peterson case, and who is that awful woman who whatever. You know what? Good. I'm glad we forgot. So we'll talk about Peterson. No matter what, from the second hearing that and seeing his face and like the things he was doing, I believed he did it, and I ignored all contradictions. I ignored all evidence that said that maybe it couldn't have been him. It was, so I got tunnel vision just like anybody else could, and that's what happens. And another psychological phenomena that's happening here is, and this is going to be kind of difficult to describe without, I usually use a visual for this one, but priming. We're very primed for things. This is just something that happens with us. And priming is the exposure to one stimulus influences the response to subsequent stimulus. And the example I can give you, Dave, if you can kind of picture this, is like, say like you're on a schoolyard and there's a foursquare, right? And in the top, so I'm going to write something in each one of the blocks, and the last word, I'm going to write some of the letters, but leave it blank, and you just guess what it is, right? So if I wrote towel, shower, and then in the bottom box to the left I wrote shampoo, and in the last box I just wrote SO blank for a little letter, and then P, what would you think the word is?
Soap.
Yeah. So, but what if it was soup? So you know what I mean? Like, that's the thing. Like you're primed to think of what that answer is. It's because everything's lining up that way. That doesn't make it true. There's no reason why that word has to be soap. It's just you were primed to think that word's so.
Well, you're looking at it within the context of
exactly
surrounding things.
So you see that AC/DC shirt, you think murderer. It's already there, and it's so hard for you to say no, that's not it. Or you see that shirt, and then you think, okay, so this is something that's influencing these people because it fits perfectly. So you were primed to think that way, and it's not really anybody's fault. It's just kind of
okay. Columbine, we know they played violent video games, so our assumption is they committed the acts because of the violent video games. Now, could that have influenced them? Sure. Is that the reason they made those? How do we that they committed those crimes?
Who knows?
How would we know that? We
can't.
can assume we're looking at all the context around the situation, and we're starting to connect dots. That's all we can do, right? And for confirmation bias, Greg, I have this conversation all the time with people because we all just walk around looking for things that confirm our beliefs, right? Like, it's the thing that drives me nuts about politics. When people start to argue about politics, and they like say, they find a piece of information from a source that clearly has a similar view, and they're like, see, I told you it was what my thought was true about it. It's like, no, you just found this one thing that also like just is in line, and you didn't look for contradictory information. You looked for information that confirmed it. And
that's not Dave getting political. That's just true on either angle.
It's
on
both
either
sides.
side.
It's all sides. No, I 100%.
And that proves that, like, once that confirmation bias is sort of set in your mind, good luck backing that up. Good luck convincing that person that you're, no, wait, actually, can you see this bit of evidence? They will say that doesn't matter. That doesn't mean anything. Even though they know in their mind that's contradictory of what they believe, it doesn't matter. That'll just solidify their beliefs even more.
It's why Fox News exists and CNN exists, because people want to watch the station, the source that is going to give them the information that they feel validates their beliefs
and their values.
And once in a while, people will get brave and they will fight that a little bit, and they will watch that contradictory news source, and they will hopefully watch it open-minded, but
they won't, because they'll be primed to be like, they'll turn the channel and they'll be like, bullshit.
Oh, I do that. I'm not going to lie. I do that. I'll turn on the contradictory news and I will sit there and just say, oh, wow. Yeah. right.
Yeah.
The whole time.
You could be watching. No, but and you could be watching something literally happening and just no, there's something, you know, it's doctored, whatever it is. But it's wild that we do that as humans, and that's why it's tough.
It's the thing that made people believe preschool kids hellings, and they didn't question or think, hey, what if they're lying? Hey, what if they're just saying this because they're scared of us?
Yeah.
Like
that's, and then next thing you know, you're in court defending yourself against a penis pecking parrot.
Yeah. They wanted to believe the kids. They wanted to believe the kids were being honest, and that it's just we have been able to make some really questionable choices as a society because of these things.
Yeah. I mean, and there's some aftermath to all of this. I can remember, like, obviously there's a ton of trauma that people are gonna have to carry for the rest of their lives. Like in one case, it was part of one of these daycare. I don't know if you read about this one. One of the men whose daughter claimed he abused her in the rituals. He obviously had no memory of it because it didn't happen. But he went to a prison because he admitted it. He thought it must be true. His daughter is saying it's true. He, maybe he was in some kind of trance, some ritualistic trance, and he must have done this to her, and he felt terrible about it. But none of it ever happened.
Sure.
That's horrible. Like to sit with yourself and say, man, I thought that, to not even know yourself anymore. You've just completely lost himself. I never thought that would be something I did, but if my daughter's saying that I did that, I guess I did that.
I think that's what makes the West Memphis 3 a really impressive, like, story, is the way, and I know at least 2 of the 3. I haven't followed all 3 of them, but I know Damian Eccles has done quite a bit since, being exonerated. And the same with, I think it's Jason Baldwin, who is now kind of like fighting for the cause of exoneration for other wrongfully imprisoned individuals. And it's like taking this situation that really impacted them and, for a period of time, ruined their lives.
Yeah.
Ruined their lives, their young lives that, whatever their hopes or potential could have been at that time, everything got put on hold, and they were impacted by this satanic panic. But they have now chosen to use that to help other people and to fight for causes of injustice that they've experienced. I think that's really impressive.
And the guy the third guy was Jesse Miskelly, and they used his confession to convict the other 2. Yeah. And he obviously had some severe intellectual deficits. If you watch,
and I do think that, and I don't know what his current status is, but I think I did read that there were some future, like, later in life arrests, and like, I don't want to give any false info.
Yeah.
I'll just leave it at that. So it did sound like maybe his journey wasn't as easy as the other. Well, not any of them were easy, but maybe not as glorious as the other 2 have been.
Yeah.
But it's just it's impressive to see how, or interesting to see how differently people can be impacted by these really terrible situations that they're in. Some people, it kind of crumbles them. It takes them down, and some people are able to find a meaning or a purpose out of it.
I don't know how well I'd do in prison. I don't think very well.
Have you ever thought about it?
I don't think I'd like it very much. No, I mean, of course. Yeah, that's like a fear.
I picture you, like, I'd go and visit you in prison, and suddenly, like, you're really, like, muscly, but only, I think only upper body though.
I feel like I would be in charge fairly quickly.
You have to do leg exercises too. You can't just keep doing push-ups all day long.
What's the point? You can only go so far.
I need legs for so hard.
Oh, so all right, Dave. I guess we should get to final thoughts. We've been talking about this for a long time. I don't know. I have vivid memories of this time period. Obviously, as children of the 80s and early 90s, Dave. To me, every scary thing was devil worshippers in the woods. There's rituals in the woods. Everything was happening in the woods, and it was very real. Because not only did you believe it and your friends believe it and talk about it, the adults had bought in too. So this was like, no one was telling you, what are you talking? Yeah. Like when my kids say like something scary, like there's a monster or whatever, I'm like, no, there's not. No one was saying that. They were like, yeah, dude, be careful. Don't go in the woods.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, the monastery in my town
is
like, aside from it supposedly being haunted because of 9 men's misery, which we can talk about another time. But they used to always say like there was animals were sacrificed by cults and things like, and it was serious. People were saying it like serious, like
No, dead serious.
really
Yeah.
thought every area of woods, cats were being slaughtered.
And then there's always that art, like I said before. So I wouldn't call it art, but it's, art imitates life, or life imitates art in this case, where there would be those kids who start doing things like that because the idea was brought into their consciousness of, if you want to act differently, if you want to stand out, if you need attention, this could be something, this could be a way to do it. This could be a way to grab at it. And I said it before, and maybe I can like hone it in a little bit better. I think that the main point of this is that it's easier to say that it's an evil entity than to admit that there may be a really dark side of humanity that needs to be addressed. And to not acknowledge that is a serious avoidance and allows for it to continue. To not say like, this is human beings, we need to address this, we need to talk about this, people who are feeling this way need to be addressed. It just allows for it to continue by calling it, oh no, that's not human nature, that's the devil. Which I think, if you break it down, the word into the Greek, Latin, whatever, it means the deceiver.
Yeah.
So we're deceiving ourselves into thinking that this is something other than ourselves.
And this is also a huge like deflection away from the prevalence of mental illness in society.
Oh, totally.
Right. So we're talking about dissociative identity disorder for a lot of people in this the recovery memory therapy, like that's somehow has a pretty prevalent connection. We're talking about teens hearing voices, murdering other teens or their parents. We're talking about a mom with schizophrenia and alcoholism making outlandish accusations and people believing it and without questioning the source.
With the dogma of religion and everything we're talking about, you can kind of understand how dissociative identity disorder, schizophrenia, even diagnoses like that are going to be confused with like some sort of demonic possession or something like that in earlier years. But we're talking the 80s, we're talking the 90s.
It's so bizarre because like it's so not that long ago.
It's still today, I'm sure. It's still today for sure. And even talking about this, Catholic guilt is giving, and I mean, I don't know what it is. Like I'm not someone who goes to church on the weekends. I feel guilty saying that, but I do believe in a higher power. I do believe in God. And this kind of stuff does scare me a little. So I don't know what that means for me. And I know that you're like, obviously we in every way that we can be different, we're different, which I think that's what makes us a good. And I don't know how you feel about that. I don't even know if you feel.
Well, I mean, I was raised Catholic, and we've talked about the Catholic guilt before, just because like there are certain things that are ingrained in us from childhood that doesn't go away. And it's just, and sometimes it doesn't go away just because we haven't like processed it and like rationalized it in our adult brains. Cause we never thought about it. Like,
no, we were built this way. This is how we were formed. We were a little piece of clay and we were molded to be a little Catholic boy.
It's like, so for example, we had a conversation about a medium, going to see a medium. And I brought it up to you and you were like, I wouldn't do that. And I was like, why? And you were like, and then like, it came up Catholic guilt, like, cause we were told that that's bad. That's like, and then it reminded me, and I have like 5 Ouija boards in my room.
No, I would not.
Dude, I have them. I've never used.
You don't. No,
I did once as a kid with my sisters. I take that back. We did do the Ouija board, but like, I in my head have it like I shouldn't use those. Like it's bad. Like I like looking at them, but it doesn't mean I'm going to use them.
No, I wouldn't recommend it.
I had a CCD teacher, so if you were Catholic, you know what CCD was like. And this woman's like, that you don't use a Ouija board. That's channeling spirits. That's channeling the dark side. You don't do that. And that's always been in my head, which is part of the reason why I wanted to have these damn Ouija boards. Cause I'm like, no, that lady was not like not all there. Like that was not true.
Well, you gotta be careful because even researching this topic, you know what Nietzsche says, sometimes if you stare into the abyss long enough, sometimes it stares back.
The abyss being the internet.
Sure. And there's another thing, and Dave, I rely heavily on philosophy to kind of get through life. And I think that before everyone thinks, boy, Greg's a big idiot, Pascal's wager. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes.
Okay. So, and for the people who haven't, it's the idea that he was saying that it's a better bet to believe in God and when you die, be wrong.
Yeah.
Than the opposite, right?
So it's kind of funny because, like, talking about religion and all that stuff, and I don't probably like loudly broadcast this, but I've questioned faith, religion.
Sure.
I don't attend church, and that is what it is. But I will not out loud say that I don't believe in anything because, like, when we all get to our end game, I don't want to be wrong. So I'm like, I'm just gonna like leave it at that and not.
Well, it's almost fundamentalist. It's almost silly to say I'm 1,000% sure that there's something.
How could I be?
And how can you say I'm 1,000% sure there's something? How can you say that I'm 1,000% sure there's nothing? I mean, how can you do that? You can't.
Yeah,
I'm just not smart enough to make that claim. So I'll hedge my bets. That's the way I see it.
Right.
That's how I
hear
feel.
You. So, and I've said this, I think in like our 7 Deadly Sins episode, I think for the most important thing is that people, if we are really like thinking in that way, if we're living a life based on good morals, then what do we really have to worry about in the end? As long as we're not doing things that we know are immoral. And like, I think that's the fear. I think the fear is as the separation of, humanity and religion has progressed over time. Like, obviously it is way more frequent that people don't attend church than it probably ever was. I think that conservative population and that really religious population is afraid. Like, well, what happens if people don't go to church? Are they going to start, committing sin everywhere or doing this crazy stuff? And I think that, like, what I understand is just because people don't necessarily practice religion the way they did, or just because they're not entering church all the time, doesn't mean everybody's just going to go around and commit heinous acts.
Right.
You can have a moral compass and not attend church.
Right. It did provide a good moral compass. It did provide that. But just because there's less of an objective morality doesn't mean that morality is gone altogether.
And I also want to say, I'm not saying anything against people who go to church, because I actually, I am totally for it. I am for whatever people need.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and it could be, obviously we've seen in our work, sometimes things that happen to people that are so heinous. I can think of people like losing a child or something like that. That faith and that hope in something that they might see this person again someday, that's everything to them. So I would never want to take that away from someone.
Yeah. Yeah, in a way, I kind of wish I had a little bit.
I know. Well, hey, you just try it. Well, I'll tell you what, you talk about faith. This turned from Satanic Panic to Bible study pretty quick. That's pretty, bless you, Dave.
What a turn. What a turn.
All right. Well, hey, I think that's a cool way to end it.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Very right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys for taking this journey with us. This was an interesting topic for us. I hope you all found it interesting. If you lived through the Satanic Panic, then you probably have some pretty decent memories of a lot of what we just talked about. And there's a ton more. So I hope people go out and are inspired to actually look more into this, because there's a ton of stories that fall in line with Satanic Panic that are so interesting, so mind-boggling. And that's kind of always our goal, is that like we present an outline of these topics, and then you guys go out and dig more into it. Because I mean, there's a lot of great conversations to be had about this stuff.
I agree.
So thank you, everyone. Please leave a rating and review if you feel inclined. We would appreciate it to help get this podcast out there to a wider audience. But we are pretty happy with where it's at right now, and you guys are amazing, and the feedback has been amazing. Thank you so much, and have a great day and night. Goodbye.
Good night, guys.